Brandon Vale did not walk into the gala that night. He made an entrance. He came through the double doors of the Meridian Grand with his hand pressed flat against the small of his new wife's back, his chin tilted at an angle that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with performance. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he was smiling. Not the smile of a man who was happy, but the smile of a man who needed everyone in the room to believe he was. Elena Whitmore saw him before he saw her. She had exactly 4 seconds to decide what to do with her face. She chose nothing. She kept her expression the way she kept her drafting lines, clean, deliberate, giving nothing away that she hadn't already decided to give. But her hand tightened around her champagne glass until her knuckles went pale, and the woman standing next to her, her colleague Diane, leaned in close and said, "Do you want to leave?" "No," Elena said quietly. "I built half the renovation in this room. I'm not leaving." If you've ever stood in a room with someone who broke you, someone who looked at everything you were and decided it wasn't enough, then you already know what the next hour of Elena Whitmore's life felt like. And if you've ever had to stand there and smile while they watched you, waiting for you to fall apart, then this story is for you. Stay until the end. Because what happens next in that ballroom is the kind of moment most people only dream about. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every week we bring you stories about real strength, real betrayal, and the kind of justice that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. Now let's go back to that ballroom, because Brandon Vale was about to make the worst mistake of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. Elena had not planned to be at the Meridian Grand Charity Gala that Thursday evening. She had planned to be in her apartment, in her oldest pair of jeans, eating leftover Thai food and going over structural load calculations for the Hargrove Tower bid she needed to submit by Monday morning. That had been the plan. A quiet, predictable, controllable plan. But her firm's senior partner, Gerald Foss, had called her at 4 in the afternoon and said, "Elena, I need a body at table 9. Hargrove's people will be there, and it would help if they could put a face to the bid before Monday." And because Elena Whitmore had spent 5 years building a reputation as the woman who showed up when it mattered, she had put on the one good dress she kept in the back of her closet. Dark navy, simple cut, nothing that asked for attention. And she had gone. She had not known Brandon would be there. That was the honest truth. If she had known, she would have called Gerald back and offered a polished, professional excuse. Not because she was afraid of Brandon Vale. She had stopped being afraid of him approximately 2 years after the day he ended their engagement, when she finally got through the grief and the humiliation and arrived at the other side of it, which was just quiet, bone-deep anger. The kind you learn to fold up and put away so you can still function. But she was not afraid of him. She just didn't want to be in the same room. There was a difference. She had been at the gala for nearly an hour before he arrived. Long enough to find table 9, shake hands with 2 of the Hargrove representatives, drink 1 glass of champagne, and begin to believe that maybe the evening would be tolerable. The ballroom was crowded. 300 people, maybe more, all of them dressed in their best and performing their best. And she had found a small eddy of relative quiet near the east side of the room, where she could watch the crowd without being required to perform herself. That was where she was standing when the double doors opened and Brandon walked in. She recognized the way he moved before she registered his face. 5 years had not changed the particular rhythm of Brandon Vale in a room full of people who were supposed to be impressed by him. He moved like he was arriving somewhere he already owned. Shoulders back, pace measured, eyes already scanning for the most important person in the room so he could position himself accordingly. The woman on his arm was someone Elena had seen in photographs. Cassandra Lee, 29 years old, daughter of a hedge fund manager, recently profiled in a lifestyle magazine under the headline, "The New Face of Philanthropic Society." She was beautiful in the way of women who have been told their whole lives that being beautiful is their primary responsibility. Not unkind, necessarily, but trained. Her smile was automatic. Her posture was designed. She moved beside Brandon the way an accessory moves beside a man who has chosen it carefully. Elena turned back to the conversation she'd been having with Diane, who was a structural engineer at her firm and had only come tonight because she said she wanted to see the restored ceiling medallions up close. Diane was talking about the medallions right now, actually. Something about the original plasterwork. And whether they'd used authentic period techniques in the restoration or just done a convincing paint job. And Elena was listening, genuinely listening, because Diane was the kind of person who made you want to listen. But part of her brain, the part that had spent years learning to track threat before it arrived, was running a quiet, parallel calculation. Brandon was moving through the room. Brandon was going to see her eventually. Brandon was going to decide what to do about it. The question was what she was going to do first. She took a slow breath and made herself finish what she was saying to Diane about the plaster restoration. She made herself pick up her champagne glass with a hand that did not shake. She made herself look like what she was. A woman at a professional event, doing fine, not braced for anything. She was not going to shrink. She was not going to leave. She had earned her place in this room. It took Brandon 11 minutes to find her. She knew he'd spotted her because the energy in her peripheral vision changed, the particular pressurized quality of someone's gaze landing on you with intention. She didn't turn immediately. She finished her sentence to Diane, made a small comment about the ceiling work, and then, only then, turned in his direction. He was already walking toward her, and he was smiling, that smile. She had forgotten how much she hated that smile. Not because it was cruel exactly, but because it was so transparently calculating. It was the smile of a man who had already decided how this encounter was going to go and was pleased with himself for having planned it. Cassandra was still on his arm, trailing slightly behind now, as though she'd been repositioned from accessory to backdrop. Elena. Brandon stopped about 3 feet away, casual, deliberate. I thought that was you. Brandon. Her voice came out level. Good. I didn't know you'd be here tonight. Oh, Cassie and I try to make it every year. He glanced around the room with the easy pride of a man surveying his territory. The Meridian Gala is kind of a tradition for us now. He paused just long enough for that to land. The us, the tradition, the implication of a life that had been beautifully constructed in the 5 years since he'd decided she wasn't part of it. You look well. She didn't say anything to that. She waited. Brandon's gaze moved over her in a way that was meant to look appreciative but was actually inventorying. Her dress, noting that it was modest, off the rack, not designed. Her hair, noting that she'd put it up in a practical knot rather than anything elaborate. Her general posture, noting, she knew, that she was there alone. Are you still with that small firm? He asked. Foss and... He paused, as if the name required effort to recall. Associates, was it? Whitmore, Foss and Associates, she said. I made partner 2 years ago. Right. His tone was warm in the way of someone who is not particularly affected by information they don't find important. That's good. Good for you. He tilted his head slightly. I heard you put in a bid for the Hargrove project. She felt something go still inside her chest. Where did you hear that? Oh, these things get around, honestly. And here the smile changed, became something with a sharper edge. Hargrove's a significant project, Elena. I don't know if a firm your size is really equipped to. We're equipped, she said. I'm sure you think so. He said it the way you'd say it to someone who was earnest but misguided, gently, condescendingly kind. I just mean, it's a different scale. The kind of project where you can't just be talented, you know? You need infrastructure, relationships, a certain kind of presence in the market. He gestured vaguely, as if he was describing something obvious. No offense, I'm just being honest. Diane had gone very quiet beside her. Elena could feel her colleague's stillness, the held breath quality of someone watching something happen and not sure whether to intervene. Elena looked at Brandon directly. 5 years ago, she would have worked to soften her expression. She would have been careful about seeming too harsh, too difficult, too much. She had spent a significant portion of her 20s learning to make herself legible and palatable to men who found her unsettling when she didn't. She was 34 now. She was done with that particular lesson. You're not being honest, she said. You're being dismissive. There's a difference. And honestly, Brandon, I'm surprised you have that much interest in my career, given that you spent the last 5 years pretending I didn't have one. His smile flickered, just for a second. Then it came back, but slightly different, tighter at the edges. Cassandra shifted her weight subtly beside him. I'm not pretending anything, he said. I'm at this gala raising money for a children's hospital wing. You're here pitching a contract. Those are just facts. I'm here because I was invited, Elena said. and because I helped design the restoration of the east wing of this building, which you're currently standing in. So yes, facts. That one landed. She saw it in the slight pause before he responded, the half-second recalibration behind his eyes. Fair enough. The smile now was stretched thin. You've always been good at surviving, Elena. I'll give you that. She had survived. He said it like surviving was barely enough. Like it was the consolation prize for a woman who hadn't managed to do anything more significant with her life. Surviving, she repeated. I mean it as a compliment. He didn't mean it as a compliment. You're resilient. You always were. That's... He paused, and she saw him recalibrate again, deciding to deliver the real blow with a smile. That's probably why you're still doing okay. Some people just have that quality, you know? The ability to keep going even when things don't work out the way they planned. He reached out and briefly touched her arm, the gesture of a man offering magnanimous comfort to someone who needed it. I hope the Hargrove bid goes well. I genuinely do. Elena felt the words land like something physical, not because they hurt the way they once would have, because what she was feeling right now was not the soft, collapsing grief she'd felt 5 years ago when he called off the engagement. It was something colder and more precise. Rage. Controlled, but absolutely real. She was aware that the people nearest to them, a couple to her left, a group of 3 near the high-top table, had begun to tune in. The radius of the conversation had expanded. This was becoming something people were watching. She opened her mouth. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say. She knew it was going to be precise. She knew it wasn't going to be cruel because she had made herself a promise a long time ago that she would not become bitter. Not for his sake, but for hers, because bitterness would have cost her too much. But she had things to say that she had been saving for approximately 5 years, and she was about to say some of them. She didn't get the chance, because a hand settled against her waist, light but certain, the hand of someone who had every right to put it there and knew it. She turned, instinct, confusion, the completely unexpected sensation of someone standing close enough to touch her in a deliberate, proprietary way when she had arrived at this event alone. The man standing beside her was tall. That was the first thing, not in a showy way, but in the way of someone whose height was just one of many things about him that was unhurried and didn't need to announce itself. He was wearing a suit that was dark and clearly expensive without advertising its expense. His face was sharp-featured, still, with the kind of calm that didn't read as peaceful. It read as controlled. Dark eyes, no performance in them. Not smiling. She did not know him. She was certain she had never seen him in her life. But he was standing with his hand at her waist as though he had been standing beside her all night. And the look on his face as he turned toward Brandon was not the look of someone who had just inserted himself into a situation. It was the look of someone who had decided the situation was now his. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was low and even in a way that somehow carried without effort. "Were you still talking?" Brandon blinked. "Excuse me?" The man, Elena would learn his name in approximately 4 minutes, and it would change the entire texture of the next several months of her life. Looked at Brandon with an expression that was not aggressive. It was something quieter and more unsettling than aggression. It was the expression of a man who had already assessed the person in front of him and arrived at a conclusion and was simply waiting for the other party to catch up. "You were explaining to her," he said, "that she's done well, given the circumstances." He said it completely neutrally. "I was curious what circumstances you meant." Brandon's chin lifted. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've—" Damian Moretti. He didn't offer his hand. He said it the way you state a fact you're not particularly invested in, but that you understand carries weight. "And you're Brandon Vale. You're a senior acquisitions director at Langford Capital. You were passed over for the VP position last spring. You put in a bid for the Cheswick commercial development 6 months ago, and you lost it to a firm that outpriced you by 8%. He paused. "I was curious what you meant about circumstances, because from where I'm standing, you're the one who seems to be managing them." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Elena felt it in her sternum. Brandon's face had done something complicated. The smile gone entirely now, replaced by something that was working hard to recover its composure. Cassandra had taken a small, almost imperceptible step backward. "I don't know what you think you're—" Brandon started. "She designed the East Wing restoration of this building." Damien's voice didn't change, still level, still patient, in the way of someone who is not actually being patient, but is choosing this register deliberately. That medallion work above us, the structural reinforcement on the south wall that allowed the windows to be expanded without compromising the load distribution. That was her work. He glanced up briefly, then back at Brandon. I've been watching her career for a while. She is not a woman who is surviving, Mr. Vale. She is a woman who is being underestimated, which is a different thing, usually by people who can't afford to acknowledge what she's actually building. Elena had stopped breathing somewhere around the mention of the medallion work. Because he was right. He had named things specifically, not generally, not vaguely. He knew her work. He had named it precisely. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she knew it meant something. Brandon's jaw was tight. That's a very interesting speech, he said. But I was just having a conversation with an old friend. I know what you were doing, Damien said. He said it without heat. You were reminding her of a version of herself that no longer exists, and you were enjoying it. He tilted his head slightly. I think we're done here. Brandon looked between them, between the stillness of Damien's face and Elena's expression, which she realized had probably given away more than she'd intended in the past 30 seconds. His gaze settled on Damien. Be careful, Brandon said quietly. It was meant to sound like a warning. It came out sounding like a man who was worried. Damien looked at him for a moment, just looked. Thank you, he said simply. And then Brandon Vale, Senior Acquisitions Director, a man who had spent 20 minutes constructing this encounter as a performance of his own dominance, turned and walked away. Cassandra followed, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her expression unreadable. Elena stood very still. Diane had vanished. She would learn later that Diane had tactfully retreated to the bar when the man with the dangerous reputation appeared at Elena's side, not because she was cowardly, but because she was perceptive. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Elena turned to look at the man who had appeared beside her and placed his hand at her waist without introduction or apology, and she said, I didn't need that. He looked at her. I know. I was about to say something. I know that too. Then why? Because I've been wanting to do something about Brandon Vale for longer than tonight, he said, and something in his voice shifted, still even, but with a different quality underneath. And you happen to be the reason he revealed himself long enough for me to. He paused. I apologize for the hand. I should have asked. She looked at him for a long moment. The ballroom noise continued around them, the clink of glasses, the low hum of 300 people performing themselves at each other. But inside the small radius of their conversation, it was quiet in a way that felt significant. Damien Moretti, she said slowly. And the name, as she said it, began to open like a door she had somehow kept closed until this exact second, because she knew that name. She had heard it in business conversations, in cautious asides, in the particular way people said certain names when they wanted to communicate a lot of information in very few words. She knew who he was. She looked at him differently then. Not afraid. She had passed afraid in the first 30 seconds and was now operating somewhere beyond that, but recalibrating, reassessing. The way she looked at a structure when she realized the load-bearing elements were not where she'd initially assumed they were. You know my work, she said. Yes. That's not a coincidence. No, he agreed. It's not. She looked at him, and he looked back at her, and somewhere in the next few minutes, in the conversation that followed, which would go longer than either of them planned, which would move from the ballroom to the terrace to a table in the corner where they sat for another 2 hours while the gala hummed around them, something began that neither of them had come to the Meridian Grand Charity Gala expecting to find. Not love. Not yet. Something earlier than that. Something that would prove more durable. Recognition. They stayed on the terrace until nearly midnight. Elena had not planned that either. She had planned to finish 1 glass of champagne, shake 2 hands at table 9, and be back in her apartment by 10. Instead, she was standing at the stone railing of the Meridian Grand's upper terrace at 11:47 with a man she had met less than 3 hours ago, watching the city lights below and trying to figure out exactly what kind of situation she had walked into. The terrace was mostly empty by that hour. A few couples drifted near the far end, keeping their own company. The night air had gone cool and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. Elena had her arms crossed, not defensively, she told herself, just because it was cold, and Damien was standing beside her with his jacket still buttoned and his hands in his pockets, which somehow made him look more composed than she felt. "You should know," she said, "that I'm going to look you up the minute I get home tonight." "I know. And whatever I find is going to affect whether I ever speak to you again." "That's reasonable." She turned to look at him directly. Most people don't say that's reasonable when someone tells them they're about to be investigated. Most people have something to hide. He glanced at her. "I have things I don't advertise. That's different." She considered that for a moment. The city stretched out below them, indifferent and enormous. In the ballroom behind them, the gala was winding down. She could hear the band shifting into something slower, the crowd noise thinning. "What do you want from this conversation?" she asked. "Not from tonight. From this conversation right now." He was quiet for a moment, not performing thoughtfulness, actually thinking. She noticed the difference. "I want to know if you're going to take the Hargrove project," he said. She blinked. "That's what you want to know?" "It's what I want to start with." She studied his profile for a second. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because I own the Hargrove building." The railing was cold under her hands. She hadn't realized she'd grabbed it. She turned to face him fully. He was already watching her with that same expression he'd had when he looked at Brandon. Not aggressive, not performed, just waiting for her to process what she'd been told and catch up. "The bid," she said slowly. "The Hargrove commercial project. Gerald told me it was a private equity group out of... It filters through 3 holding companies. Damien said. "But yes, it's mine." She stared at him. "So when you said you'd been watching my career, I had a short list of architects for that project. You were on it. And tonight?" Something shifted in his expression, barely perceptible, but she caught it. "Tonight was not planned. I didn't know you'd be here. I came because I make a donation every year to the Children's Hospital Fund, and I saw what was happening across the room, and I made a decision. A decision to walk over to a stranger and put your hand on her waist. A decision," he said carefully, "to stop watching something I didn't like and do something about it instead." He paused. "I shouldn't have touched you without asking. That was wrong. I want to be clear that I know that." Elena looked at him for a long moment. The wind came up off the street and moved through her hair, and she didn't bother fixing it. "You're a strange man," she said finally. "Yes," he agreed, without any particular distress about it. She laughed. It came out before she'd approved it, short, surprised, more genuine than she'd intended to give him. She pressed her lips together and looked back out at the city. "I haven't made a decision about the bid," she said. "I submit Monday morning. I'll make the decision before then." "Okay. I'm not going to let what happened tonight influence it." "I didn't ask you to." "I know you didn't. I'm telling you anyway." She turned back to face him one more time. "And if I get the project, I want to be very clear that I got it because my work is good. Not because of..." She gestured briefly between them. "Whatever this was." Damien looked at her steadily. "You're going to get it because your work is good," he said. "Tonight has nothing to do with it. It never did." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded once, picked up her clutch from where she'd set it on the railing, and said, "Good night, Mr. Moretti." "Good night, Ms. Whitmore." She walked back through the terrace doors and didn't look back, but her pulse was doing something uneven and persistent all the way down to the lobby, and she was still arguing with herself about what it meant when she got into the cab home. She looked him up the minute she got home. It took her 45 minutes and 3 separate searches before she felt like she had a reasonably complete picture, and none of it was simple. Damien Moretti, 41 years old, CEO of Moretti Development Group, a real estate empire with holdings across 6 states, with a portfolio that included commercial towers, residential developments, and 3 major historic restoration projects. Net worth estimated in the upper range of the word billionaire by 2 different financial publications, though neither seemed confident in their numbers. Born in Chicago, educated partly in Italy, returned to the States at 24. No criminal record. Several investigations over the years, antitrust, labor practices, 1 federal probe that was closed without charges 18 months after it opened. And then the part that was not in the financial publications, but that existed in the particular texture of certain news articles, in the careful phrasing of business reporters who seemed to be writing around something they couldn't quite name. The Moretti family, the older generation, the kinds of businesses that had operated out of Chicago in the 80s and 90s that nobody wrote about directly in polite company. She sat with that for a long time, at her kitchen table, in her oldest jeans, the Thai food forgotten and cold in its container beside her laptop. Then she opened her project files for the Hargrove bid and worked until 3 in the morning. She submitted the bid Sunday at 11 p.m., 1 hour before the deadline. It was the best work she had produced in 5 years. She knew it the way she always knew when something was right. Not pride exactly, but a kind of structural certainty. The way you know when the load is properly distributed and nothing is going to shift. The call came Wednesday morning. She was at her desk reviewing a zoning application for a much smaller project, a mixed-use renovation in the Garfield district, when her phone rang and the voice on the other end identified itself as the office of Moretti Development Group and asked if she had a moment to speak with Mr. Moretti directly. She had a moment. His voice on the phone was the same as it had been on the terrace, even, unhurried. The Hargrove project is yours if you want it. She sat very still at her desk. Diane was 15 feet away, visible through the glass partition, completely unaware that anything significant was happening. Why? Elena asked. Because your structural analysis on the east-facing load distribution is the first proposal we've received that accounts correctly for the seismic variance in that zone. And your materials specification is the only one that hits our timeline without compromising the historical facade requirements. A pause. Your competition included firms 4 times your size. This is not a consolation award. She exhaled slowly through her nose. I need to bring my partner in on any contract of this size, she said. Gerald Foss would need to be involved. Of course. And I need full access to the existing engineering records. All of them. Including whatever's been done on the foundation since 2019, because there's something in the soil report that doesn't align with the original survey, and I want to understand why before I commit to anything. There was a pause on the other end, slightly longer than the others. You caught that, he said. I catch things. Yes, he said. You do. Another pause. The records will be made available. All of them. His voice had changed slightly, still controlled, but with something underneath it that she couldn't name yet. Can you come to the site Thursday afternoon? I'd like to walk it with you before you sign anything. She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. 2 o'clock, she said. And Mr. Moretti, I need you to understand that if I find anything at that site that makes me uncomfortable, I will walk away from the contract regardless of the fee. I don't compromise structural integrity for anyone. I wouldn't offer you this project if you did, he said. She showed up at the Hargrove site at 1:58 Thursday afternoon and spent 4 hours walking every floor of the building with Damian Moretti. And the experience was one of the more disorienting of her professional life. Because he knew the building. Not the way a developer knows a property, asset, liability, return on investment, but the way a person knows a place they care about. He knew where the original ironwork was still intact under 40 years of renovation. He knew which stairwell had been blocked off in the 70s and why. He had opinions about the windows that were specific and informed and occasionally wrong, which she told him directly, and he listened without performing offense. They disagreed about the lobby redesign for approximately 25 minutes while standing in the middle of the gutted ground floor, their voices echoing off bare concrete. He wanted to preserve the original terrazzo floor. She wanted to preserve it too, but argued that the current condition required selective replacement that would need to be architecturally integrated rather than strictly restored, and that chasing perfect preservation at the expense of structural honesty was a kind of dishonesty in itself. He was quiet after that for a moment. Then he said, "Show me." She showed him. She crouched down with her site inspection torch and showed him exactly where the substrate damage began and where it ended and what that meant for any restoration plan that was going to hold up past the first decade. He crouched down beside her and looked at it without saying anything for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay meaning you agree?" "Okay meaning you've convinced me." He stood up, brushing concrete dust off his knee. "I don't like it, but you're right." She stood up too. They were close in the dim of the gutted lobby, closer than the terrace, closer than the ballroom, and she was suddenly very aware of the particular quality of his attention. It wasn't the attention Brandon had given her, which had always felt like appraisal. It was something different, something that felt less comfortable in a way, because it felt more accurate. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I need you to be straight with me. All right. The contract. The project. Does any part of this connect to what happened at the gala? He held her gaze. You were on the short list before the gala. Your name was on my desk in August. The gala was November. He paused. What happened that night? I don't regret it, but it had nothing to do with this decision. She searched his face for the particular micro-expression that accompanied a well-constructed lie. She had gotten good at reading that particular signal from years of working in an industry full of people who told her what she wanted to hear and meant something else entirely. She didn't find it. Okay, she said. Okay meaning you believe me? Okay meaning I'm going to sign the contract and we'll find out. He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before he put it away. They signed 2 weeks later. The project had a 14-month timeline, a budget of $50 million, and enough complexity to occupy a team of 12. Elena hired carefully. People she trusted, people she had worked with before, people who would tell her when something was wrong rather than waiting until it became a problem. She also, in those 2 weeks, spent a considerable amount of time arguing with herself about Damian Moretti and the entirely inconvenient fact that she thought about him more than was professionally appropriate. It wasn't the ballroom moment. She had decided, after considerable internal cross-examination, that what had happened at the gala was not what was doing this to her. It was the building. It was him crouching on the floor of the gutted lobby and looking at the substrate damage she'd shown him and saying, "Okay, you've convinced me," as though being convinced was simply a natural and acceptable outcome when the evidence was clear. It was the way he talked about the ironwork and the stairwell and the windows, not as features or selling points, but as facts he had taken the time to know. It was inconvenient, and she was a professional, and she was going to handle it. She handled it by working 12-hour days and staying focused on load calculations. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week of the contract, she was reviewing revised foundation specs in the site trailer when her assistant Marcus knocked and said Gerald Foss was on the phone, and it sounded important. Gerald's voice, when she picked up, was careful in a way that made her stomach tighten before he'd said 3 words. Brandon Vale called me this morning, Gerald said. She set down her pencil. He called you. He said he wanted to talk about the Hargrove project. He framed it as a professional courtesy. Gerald paused. He implied that there might be questions about how you came to secure the contract. Given your, and I'm quoting him here, personal relationship with the developer. The site trailer was quiet. Through the small window, she could see the crane moving on the east side of the building, slow and deliberate. He called my partner, she said, to suggest that I slept my way into a $50 million contract. He was more oblique than that. But yes, that's the content. She picked up her pencil again, then put it down. Her hand was very steady, and she was very, very angry in the specific way that had no good outlet right now, which made it worse. What did you tell him? I told him that the bid was submitted through a fully competitive process, and that the contract was awarded on merit, and that if he had concerns about professional conduct, he should direct them to the relevant licensing board rather than calling me. Gerald paused. Elena, is there anything I need to know? The question had 2 layers to it, and she heard both of them. I met Damian Moretti the night of the gala, she said. I didn't know he owned the Hargrove building before that night. The bid was already in preparation when I met him. The contract was awarded 6 days after we met. I have had 3 professional meetings with him since then, all documented, all with other people present. She paused. There is nothing that compromises the integrity of this project or this firm. Gerald was quiet for a moment. I believe you, he said. I want you to know that. But Elena, Brandon Vale is the kind of person who doesn't stop when something doesn't work the first time. He's going to keep pushing. I know, she said. He's got contacts in the permit office. He was talking about raising questions about the material specifications. The material specifications are fully documented and compliant. He won't find anything. He doesn't need to find anything, Gerald said quietly. He just needs to make enough noise. She sat with that after she hung up. The crane moved outside the window. A worker crossed the site below with a clipboard, not looking up. Brandon had spent 5 years rebuilding his ego after she'd stopped being available to undermine. She understood that now in a way she hadn't fully understood at the gala. That his presence there that night, the suit, the smile, the careful performance of his new life, had all been for her. Not for the crowd. For her. Because she was the specific evidence of a chapter he hadn't been able to close cleanly, and it had been eating at him. And when he'd seen her standing there looking like someone who was doing all right, it had cracked something open in him. And now she had the Hargrove contract. Now she was working with Damian Moretti. Now she was visible in a way that Brandon could not dismiss as just surviving. She picked up her phone and called Damian. He picked up on the second ring. "Brandon Vale called my partner," she said without preamble. "He suggested the contract was improper. He's going to go after the material specs." A brief silence. "When did this happen?" "This morning." "Are your specs clean?" "My specs are immaculate." "Okay." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger exactly, but something harder. "I'll make some calls." "No." The word came out sharp. "Don't." A pause. "Elena, if you make calls and things get quiet, he gets to say the contract was protected from the outside. I need to fight this myself. I need there to be a clear and documented record that this project stands on its own merits, and that any attempt to interfere with it fails on the evidence. Not because someone made calls." She was speaking quickly now, the words coming with the precision of someone who has already worked out the structure of what they need to say. "Can you let me handle this?" Another pause, longer this time. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Every document related to the bid selection process. The full evaluation record. I want to be able to show anyone who asks exactly how this decision was made and why." "You'll have it by end of day." "Thank you." She was about to hang up when he said, "Elena." "Yeah." "He's not going to stop with the material specs." She already knew that. She'd known it from the moment Gerald said Brandon's name. Brandon Vale didn't do things halfway. He did them with escalation and sustained pressure and the specific patience of a man who had decided that being right was less important than making the other person wrong. "I know," she said. "I want you to tell me if it gets worse. Not so I can fix it for you, so I know what's coming." She considered that for a moment. The distinction he was drawing, not to fix it, to know. It was a more thoughtful distinction than she'd expected. "Okay," she said. "I'll keep you informed." She hung up and went back to the foundation specs and worked for another 4 hours without stopping for food or coffee or anything except the problem in front of her, which was how she had always handled things that scared her, by going directly into the work, where the rules were clear and the outcomes were measurable, and the only question was whether she was good enough, and she had spent 15 years making sure the answer to that question was yes. It was on a Friday evening, 6 weeks into the project, that things changed in a way that could not be changed back. She had sent her team home at 6 and stayed alone in the site trailer to finish the revised window specification that the contractor needed by Monday. Outside, the building was quiet, the construction day done, the site going dark except for the security lighting along the perimeter. She heard the trailer door open at 7:15 and looked up, expecting Marcus, who sometimes came back for things he'd forgotten. It was not Marcus. Brandon Vale stood in the doorway of her site trailer in a suit that was too clean for a construction site, his eyes moving over the interior, the drawings, the stacked files, the evidence of a project that was very much real and very much underway, with an expression that told her he hadn't expected quite this level of organization. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice was flat. "This is a restricted site. You don't have clearance." The gate was open. He stepped in anyway, letting the door fall shut behind him. "I'm not here to make trouble, Elena. You called my partner and implied I'm sleeping with the client." She set down her pencil. "You're here to make trouble. You've been making trouble for 6 weeks. The gate being open doesn't change what you are or why you're here." He moved a few steps closer. Not threatening. He wasn't a physical threat, she'd never thought that, but with the deliberateness of someone who wanted to be in her space. "I want you to walk away from this project." She looked at him. "I want you to tell Moretti that you're withdrawing for personal reasons," he said. "I'll make it easy. I won't push the material specs issue any further. I'll back off Gerald. You walk away, and this ends." "What makes you think I'd do that?" "Because I know things about Damian Moretti that you might not want to be attached to." His voice was careful. "This isn't about you and me, Elena. This is about the kind of man you've decided to work for, and what that's going to look like when it comes out." Her chest was very tight. Her face was very still. "Get out of my sight trailer," she said.
Elena, get out. She stood up. She was not particularly tall, but she was not moving, and the stillness of her was something he registered. She saw it in the small adjustment he made, the slight backward shift of his weight. "If you contact my partner again, I will file a harassment complaint with the licensing board. If you contact anyone connected to this project, I will pursue a tortious interference claim. If you show up on this site again without authorization, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Are we clear?" Brandon's jaw went tight. The careful, controlled expression he'd worn at the gala was gone. What was underneath it was something rawer and less managed. "You don't know what you're walking into," he said, "with him. You think you've arrived somewhere, Elena. You think this project, this man, this is your moment. But you're going to look back at this conversation and realize I was the one trying to help you. The only thing you're trying to do," she said quietly, "is make me smaller than you need me to be. You've been doing it for 5 years. You did it at the gala. You're doing it right now." She held his gaze. "It hasn't worked yet." He stood there for another moment. Then he turned and walked out of the trailer, and the door swung shut behind him with a sound that was not quite a slam, but close enough. Elena sat back down at her desk. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not. She sat very still for approximately 90 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and opened her message thread with Damien. She typed, "He came to the site. In person. I need to know what he has on you." The response came in 4 minutes. "I know what he has. We need to talk. Not by phone. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, "Yes." And that was the moment. Not the gala, not the contract signing, not any of the things that had felt like turning points in the weeks before. That was the moment Elena Whitmore understood that whatever she had walked into with Damien Moretti, she was now too far in to pretend she could walk back out of it cleanly, and that the road ahead of her was going to require things from her that she was not entirely sure she had. She didn't sleep. She tried, lay down at 11, closed her eyes, ran through the window specifications in her head the way she sometimes did when she needed her brain to quiet down and focus on something structural and solvable. It didn't work. At 12:30, she got up and made coffee she didn't drink and sat at her kitchen table and looked at the city outside her window. "I know what he has." 4 words. Damien had typed them with the same economy he used for everything, and she had read them 6 times in the cab home and 3 more times before she turned out the light, and each time they landed differently. Not, "I don't know what he means." Not, "There's nothing to worry about." "I know what he has." Present tense, complete sentence. The sentence of a man who had been waiting for a specific thing to arrive and had now been informed that it had. She thought about Brandon's face in the trailer, the rawness of it, the thing underneath the controlled expression that she'd seen for just a moment before he pulled it back. He hadn't looked triumphant. He'd looked like a man who was certain he was holding something real. She got to Moretti Development Group's offices at 8:55 the next morning. The building was a converted warehouse in the River District. 8 stories, exposed brick, the kind of renovation that looked effortless and wasn't. She noticed the structural choices in the lobby without meaning to. Good bones. Someone had respected them. The receptionist brought her to a conference room on the 6th floor and told her Damien would be with her shortly. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the river, gray and flat in the morning light. A carafe of coffee on the table. She poured herself a cup and stood at the window and waited. He came in at 9:03. He was in a dark suit, no tie, and he looked like he had slept approximately as well as she had, which was to say, not well, though on him it read differently. Not exhaustion, but a kind of compressed alertness. The look of someone who had been running calculations through the night and arrived at conclusions he didn't like. He closed the conference room door behind him. He didn't sit down immediately. He stood on the opposite side of the table and looked at her with an expression that was more open than anything she'd seen from him before, which was itself unsettling, because Damien Moretti's face was not a place where things were usually left exposed. "I'm going to tell you everything," he said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She set down her coffee cup. "Okay." He sat down then, across from her, and he told her. His father, Vincent Moretti, had run a significant portion of Chicago's construction industry in the 80s and 90s through methods that were, at minimum, extra-legal. Union manipulation,
permit fraud, the occasional arrangement with city officials that went beyond what the law considered acceptable. Vincent Moretti had died in 2009 without ever being formally charged with anything because he had been meticulous, and because several key witnesses had developed sudden and profound cases of unavailability. Damien had spent his adult life building something different. The legitimate empire, the development group, the portfolio, the historic restoration projects, was real. The money was clean. He had structured everything deliberately so that the wall between his father's world and his own was thick and documented and defensible. But walls, he said, were not the same as history. Brandon Vale had spent the past 4 months assembling a file, not about Damien's current operations. There was nothing actionable there, Damien was certain of that, but about the Hargrove building specifically, because the Hargrove building had been one of Vincent Moretti's projects. 1987. And buried in the original construction records from 1987 was a set of subcontracting payments that had been routed through a company connected to a city alderman who had been under investigation at the time. The investigation had gone nowhere. The alderman had eventually been convicted of something unrelated. The records had sat in a municipal archive for 37 years. Brandon had found them, or rather Brandon had paid someone to find them, and that someone had assembled them into a document that, without context, looked like evidence that the Hargrove building had been built on a foundation of corruption, and that Damien Moretti, as the current owner, was either aware of the legacy or complicit in concealing it. "It's not criminal," Damien said. "My lawyers have looked at it. There's nothing there that touches me legally. But if it goes to the press the way Brandon intends it to, it looks criminal. And in the current climate, the way these things move..." He stopped. Elena had been very still through all of this. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her. Her coffee was getting cold. "The project gets suspended pending review," she said, "at minimum. And my firm gets associated with a corruption story before the building is even finished." He didn't look away. "Yes. And you knew about this, about the 1987 records." A pause. "I knew they existed. I didn't know Brandon had found them." She absorbed that. The river outside the window was moving slowly, carrying something she couldn't identify on its surface. "When were you going to tell me?" she asked. "I was going to tell you when I had a solution to offer alongside the problem." His voice was even, but there was something in it she hadn't heard before, something that cost him something to say. "That was a mistake in judgment. I should have told you before the contract was signed." The silence in the room had a particular quality, not hostile but heavy. "Why didn't you?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "Because I wanted you on this project, and I knew if I told you there was a potential legacy issue with the building before you'd seen the evidence for yourself, you would have declined." He paused. "I told myself the records weren't a real threat. I was wrong about that." She looked at him for a long time. She was doing the thing she always did when something shifted unexpectedly, running the new information through the structure she'd already built, finding where it changed the load distribution, assessing what it meant for the integrity of the whole. What it meant was this: he had withheld information that was material to her decision. He had done it deliberately, not out of malice, but out of the specific kind of arrogance that assumes the outcome you want justifies the process you use to get there. She knew that arrogance well. She had seen it in boardrooms and permit offices and on construction sites for 15 years. She had fought it for 15 years. And here it was, sitting across from her in a $6,000 suit, looking at her with an expression that was the closest thing to remorse she'd seen on Damien Moretti's face. "I need to think," she said. "I know. I'm not making any decisions in this room right now." "Ow. That's fair." She picked up her coffee cup, then put it down again without drinking from it. "What does Brandon want? Ultimately, not just the project killed. What does he actually want?" Damien was quiet for a moment. "He wants me to back away from anything that puts him in a position of inferiority. The Langford VP position he lost. One of our subsidiaries submitted competing analysis that affected their decision. He blames me for that, though the analysis was accurate and the decision was theirs." He paused. "And he wants you to fail, in a way that's public enough to confirm whatever it is he needs to believe about you." She felt something move through her chest that wasn't grief and wasn't anger. It was something more tired than either of those. "He can't stand it," she said almost to herself. "That's what this is. He just cannot stand it. No, Damien said. He can't. She stood up. She picked up her bag and her coat and she moved toward the door. And then she stopped with her hand on the door frame and turned back. Fix the disclosure, she said. Whatever you should have told me before I signed, put it in writing, dated today, and have your lawyers send it to Gerald. I want it on record that when it became clear there was a potential issue, you informed us immediately. She paused. It won't undo the problem, but it'll establish the timeline. He nodded once. Done. And Damien. She held his gaze across the room. Don't make decisions for me again. If something affects this project, you tell me. All of it, even if you think it'll make me walk away. He looked at her steadily. Understood. She left. She spent the weekend alone, which was not unusual for her but felt different this time. More intentional, more necessary. She walked the lake on Saturday morning for 2 hours without her phone, which she almost never did. She needed to think without interruption about what she was going to do. And thinking about what she was going to do required first being honest with herself about the full shape of the situation she was in. The full shape was this. She had taken a contract on a project she believed in, for a building she had genuine feelings about, with a client who had withheld relevant information from her, and whose family history was about to be weaponized by a man who had decided that her success was personally intolerable. She could withdraw. The contract had an exit clause. She had insisted on one, because she always did. And she could invoke it, and her firm would take a financial hit but would survive. And she would go back to smaller projects, and the Garfield renovation, and the quiet, manageable professional life she had been living before the Meridian Grand Gala. Or she could stay. She made the decision somewhere around the halfway point of the lake walk, in the cold morning air with the water gray and wide to her left. She made it the same way she made structural decisions, not by choosing what she wanted, but by identifying what was true and following the truth to its necessary conclusion. The truth was that the 1987 records were a problem with context, and context was something she knew how to build. She called Gerald on Sunday evening. She told him everything, the full version, Damien's disclosure, the 1987 records, Brandon's file, and her own assessment of the legal and reputational exposure. Gerald listened without interrupting, which was how she knew he was genuinely worried, because Gerald Foss interrupted everyone. When she finished, there was a long silence. You want to stay on the project, he said. Yes. Tell me why. Because walking away confirms the story Brandon wants to tell. If we withdraw, the narrative is that there was something wrong with the contract and we knew it. If we stay, and we document everything, and we finish the building on time and on spec, then the story is about the building, not about the dirt someone dug up about who poured the foundation 37 years ago. She paused. And because the building deserves to be finished right, someone should do it right. Gerald was quiet again. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Okay? Is there anything personal in this decision? She looked out her apartment window at the city. She thought about Damien in the conference room, looking at her with that expression that had cost him something to wear. She thought about the lobby of the Hargrove building, the two of them crouching over the damaged substrate in the dim light, him saying, "Okay, you've convinced me." "Yes," she said. "There's something personal, but the professional decision is still correct." Gerald sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had been in the industry long enough to know that the right professional decision and the personally complicated decision were sometimes the same decision, and that this did not make either of them wrong. "All right," he said, "we stay. But Elena, we do this clean. Everything documented, everything by the book, no shortcuts and no favors from Moretti. If this goes sideways, I need to be able to stand in front of any investigator or journalist or licensing board and show them a file that is absolutely without question." "That's exactly how I intend to do it," she said. She went back to the site Monday morning. The next 3 weeks were the hardest professional weeks of her life, and she had had some hard weeks. She drove the project with a precision that left no room for error and no tolerance for anything she couldn't document and defend. She ran every material delivery against the specification. She required sign-off on every structural decision. She kept a site log that was 17 pages by the end of the first week. She also, quietly and without announcing it to anyone, began building a second file. Not a project file, an evidentiary file. Every communication from Brandon Vale, the ones to Gerald, the ones she could access through contacts in the permit office where he'd been making inquiries, she documented and dated, so began compiling independent structural tests on every phase of the project, not because the tests were required, but because she wanted a record that was so thorough and so clean that there would be no surface for Brandon's accusations to grip. She was in the middle of reviewing the third-floor framing inspection report on a Thursday morning when Marcus appeared in the trailer doorway with an expression she didn't like. "There's someone here," he said, "from the city, a structural inspector. He says he has a complaint-generated work order." She set down the report. "What's the complaint?" Marcus held up a clipboard. "Improper load-bearing specification on the east curtain wall. Someone filed it with the city's construction complaints office 2 days ago." She felt the cold move through her before the thought was fully formed. "Who filed it?" "It's listed as anonymous." She stood up and went outside. The inspector was a man named Delgado, mid-40s, professional, with the carefully neutral manner of someone who was doing a job and did not particularly want to be in the middle of whatever this situation was. She introduced herself and asked to see the work order. She read it twice, standing in the wind on the construction site. The complaint was specific. Too specific for someone without technical knowledge. It cited not just the curtain wall, but a particular connection detail on the northeast corner, a detail that was in the drawings but had not yet been constructed, which meant the person who filed it had access to the drawings, not just the site. She looked at Delgado. "This complaint references construction details that aren't visible from the site," she said. "The connection it describes is in the design drawings. Do you know how the complainant would have accessed those?" Delgado looked at her carefully. "I'm not able to speak to that. I'm here to conduct the inspection." "Understood. I want to be on record as noting the concern." She held his gaze. "You'll have full access to the site. I'll walk with you personally." She walked with him for 2 hours. She answered every question. She provided every document he asked for. The connection detail he was there to inspect was, as she knew it would be, fully compliant. In fact, it exceeded the specification requirement by a margin she'd built in deliberately because she always built in margin, and because she had known, in some quiet professional part of herself, that someone was going to come looking. Delgado took photographs and made notes, and at the end of 2 hours he looked at her with an expression that had shifted from careful neutrality to something more direct. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "I'm going to note in my report that the complaint appears inconsistent with the current state of construction and that the specified connection detail is fully compliant with city code." He paused. "This isn't the first complaint-generated inspection on this site." She went still. "How many have there been?" "This is the third. The other 2 were before you came on as lead architect." He paused again, and she could see him deciding how much to say. 3 inspections in 8 weeks, all complaint-generated, all anonymous, all finding no violations. That pattern gets flagged. Flagged how? It goes to the oversight office. They look at who's filing and whether there's evidence of bad faith use of the complaints process. He closed his notebook. "I'm telling you this because you seem like someone who would want to know." She did want to know. She thanked him and walked him to the gate and watched him drive away, and then she stood on the construction site in the cold November wind and felt the shape of what was happening become suddenly, terribly clear. Brandon wasn't just trying to kill the project. He was trying to create a record. 3 anonymous complaints. 3 inspections. Even if every inspection found nothing, especially if every inspection found nothing, the pattern itself was a story. A building that regulatory bodies kept returning to. A project with a complicated history and a developer with a complicated family name and an architect who had a personal relationship with said developer. Put those things together in the right order for the right audience, and you didn't need a single provable violation. You just needed the suggestion of one. She called Damien from the site. He picked up immediately. "I know," he said. "I just heard. My site manager called me." "This is the 3rd inspection," she said. "Did you know about the first 2? A pause. "Yes." The pause told her everything she needed to know about why he hadn't mentioned it. "Damien." Her voice was very quiet and very controlled. "What did I tell you?" "I know." "What did I tell you?" "Elena?" "I told you to tell me everything. I told you that 3 weeks ago in your office. Was that not a clear enough instruction?" "I was handling it. My legal team was tracking the complaint source. I don't care what your legal team was tracking." She pressed her palm flat against the cold metal of the site trailer wall and breathed. I am the architect of record on this building. Every inspection that happens on this site goes in my professional file. Every complaint affects my license. This is not your problem to handle. This is my career. She stopped. Let the silence have a moment.
Do you understand the difference? He was quiet on the other end for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had a quality she hadn't heard before, something stripped of its usual composure. Yes, he said. I understand. I'm sorry. She had not expected the apology and didn't know what to do with it immediately, so she set it aside.
I need the complaint records, she said. All three. Whatever your legal team has on the source tracking, and I need them today. You'll have them within the hour. She hung up and went back into the trailer and sat down at her desk and looked at the framing inspection report that was still open where she'd left it, and thought about what Delgado had said about patterns getting flagged. And she thought about the evidentiary files she'd been building for 3 weeks. And she thought about the fact that she had been constructing her defense before she fully understood the attack. She understood it now. The records arrived in 90 minutes, sent directly to her personal email from Damien's legal team. She read through them carefully, making notes, cross-referencing dates. The first 2 complaints had been filed within days of each other, 8 weeks ago, before she'd come on the project. The timing aligned with something she'd nearly missed, a public meeting of the city's Development Oversight Board, where the Hargrove project had been briefly mentioned in connection with a permit approval. A meeting that was public record. A meeting that Brandon Vale, with his contacts in the permit office, would have known about. He'd been watching this project before she was attached to it. He'd been laying groundwork before the gala, before the contract, before any of this became personal. She had walked into something that was already in motion. She sat with that understanding for a while. The afternoon light moved across the site outside the trailer window, slow and gray. A worker called out something to another across the scaffolding. The building rose above all of it, patient and unfinished, holding its shape against the sky. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. You should ask Moretti about the Cheswick development, specifically who he spoke to in the zoning office in March. You think you know what you're dealing with. You don't. She stared at the message. Read it twice. Then she took a screenshot, added it to the evidentiary file, and sat very still for a moment while something moved through her that was not quite fear, but was in the same neighborhood. The Cheswick development. Brandon had mentioned Cheswick at the gala. He'd said it himself, almost as an aside. The bid he'd lost. The firm that had outpriced him by 8%. He'd said it was Moretti's subsidiary that had submitted the competing analysis that affected the decision. And now someone with Brandon's number, or Brandon's network, or Brandon himself using a burner, was telling her to look at who Damien had spoken to in the zoning office, which meant either Brandon had found actual evidence of something improper at Cheswick, or he was manufacturing the suggestion of it, or there was a third possibility that she had been trying not to look at directly, which was that she did not have the full picture of who Damien Moretti was, and that what she had taken for a man who was different from his father was in fact a man who was simply more careful about the same things. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again. She did not call Damien. She called her friend Renata instead, Renata Cruz, who was a real estate attorney and who Elena trusted more than almost anyone she knew, and who had the specific quality of telling you the truth even when it was going to make you uncomfortable. I need a favor, Elena said when Renata picked up. And I need you to not ask me too many questions until after you've done it. That's a concerning opening, Renata said. I need you to look into something for me. The Cheswick development, zoning decisions, March of this year, specifically any contact between the zoning office and Moretti Development Group or any of its subsidiaries. A pause. Elena, what are you into? I don't know yet, she said. That's what I'm trying to find out. She hung up and sat in the trailer as the light and darker, the construction site going quiet around her, the building holding its unfinished shape against the November sky, and she felt, for the first time since she had walked into the Meridian Grand 4 months ago in her navy dress, with her practical hair and her clean professional armor, she felt the particular vertigo of someone who has been walking on ground they believed was solid and has just heard, somewhere beneath them, the sound that ground makes before it shifts. Renata called back at 7:41 the next morning. Elena was already at her kitchen table with coffee and her laptop open, the evidentiary file on the left side of the screen, and the Hargrove structural drawings on the right, because she had discovered sometime around 2 a.m. that she could not sleep and had decided that if she was going to be awake, she was going to be useful. She picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me," she said. Renata's voice was careful in the way it got when she had found something she wished she hadn't. Cheswick zoning approval came through in February. Fast-tracked, 22 days from application to approval, which for a commercial development of that size is unusually quick. Standard timeline is 60 to 90 days. A pause. "I found a notation in the public meeting record from the zoning board session where it was approved. One board member recused herself, citing a conflict of interest. Her name is Patricia Hale." Elena set down her coffee cup. "Who is Patricia Hale?" "As of last year, she's the zoning board's deputy chair. Before that, she was a senior planner at the city development office." Another pause. "And her brother-in-law is on the board of one of Moretti Development Group's subsidiary holding companies." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the city was starting to make its morning sounds. A truck on the street below. Someone's door. "Is that provable?" Elena asked. "The board membership is public record. The family connection is a matter of public record. The recusal is documented." Renata stopped. "Elena, the recusal means she acknowledged the conflict. It doesn't mean anything improper happened. A recusal is the correct response to a conflict of interest. But it's a connection. It's a connection that exists in documents that anyone determined enough can find." Renata's voice shifted. "Which means whoever sent you that text already found it, and the question is what they intend to do with it." Elena stared at the structural drawings on her screen without seeing them. "Is it enough to constitute improper influence on the Cheswick approval?" she asked. "Without more evidence? No. With the right journalist framing it the right way? Maybe not legally actionable, but reputationally—" Renata didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Okay," Elena said. "Okay is not a plan." "I know." She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. "I need to talk to Damien." "Elena." Renata's voice had changed again, softer now, more direct. "I need to ask you something as your friend and not your attorney." "Go ahead." "How deep in are you with this man? Not professionally, personally." She opened her eyes. The structural drawings were still there, patient and technical, asking nothing of her. "I don't know," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. "Okay," Renata said. "Then be very careful about how much you tell him before you know whether what you find changes your answer to that question." She called Damien at 8:15 and told him she needed to see him in person. Not his office. She suggested a coffee place in the River District, neutral ground, public enough that it felt like a professional meeting rather than something else. He agreed without asking why she'd chosen somewhere other than his office, which told her he had already understood something from the fact that she was asking. He was there when she arrived, which meant he had gotten there before her, which meant he had left immediately after she called. She noted that without knowing exactly what to do with it. She sat down across from him. A server came and she ordered coffee she didn't want and waited until they were alone again. Then she told him what Renata had found. All of it. Flat, precise, no editorializing. She watched his face while she talked, the way she always watched structures for the first signs of stress response, looking for the place where the load was landing and whether it was being held. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, and he was looking at a point slightly to the left of her shoulder with an expression that was working very hard at nothing. "Patricia Hale's recusal was her attorney's recommendation," he said finally. "I was informed of it before the board session. I told my legal team it was the correct call and that the application should proceed without any communication from our side to the board during deliberation." He looked at her directly. "I did not speak to Patricia Hale. I did not ask anyone to speak to her. The Cheswick approval was fast-tracked because the application was complete and technically compliant, which is the actual reason applications move quickly." She looked at him. "You knew about the family connection. I was made aware of it when she recused herself. And you didn't think that was something you should mention to anyone who might be working with you?" His jaw tightened slightly. "I thought it was handled." "You thought a lot of things were handled," she said. Not loudly, just directly.
The way she said things when she was past the point of managing how they landed. The 1987 records were handled. The complaint inspections were handled. Now this is handled. She pressed both hands flat on the table. Damien, I cannot keep finding out things you decided not to tell me. I cannot build a defense around something if I don't know the full shape of what I'm defending. I know. Then why do I keep finding out things from other people? He looked at her then, fully, with nothing particularly managed about it, and for a second she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not guilt, exactly. Something older than guilt. The expression of a man who has been operating alone for so long that the habit of withholding is not strategy anymore. It's just structure. It's just how he's built. Because I've spent 20 years dealing with problems before they become other people's problems, he said. And I don't know how to do it differently. I know that's not an acceptable answer. It's an honest one, she said. She picked up her coffee. It was too hot, and she drank it anyway. Here's what I need to know. Is there anything else? Anything at all? Any connection? Any decision? Any piece of paper somewhere that Brandon Vale or anyone working with him could find and put in front of a camera, because I need to know now. Not when it becomes a problem, now. He was quiet for a moment that was longer than she liked. There's a permit approval from 2021, he said, on the Riverside Residential Complex. A variance on building height. The approval came through the same office that handles Hargrove's permits. He paused. It was granted on merit, but the timeline was faster than typical. She set down her cup. How much faster? 14 days. Who reviewed it? I don't know the specific reviewer. Find out. She said it without heat. Today. And find out if there's any connection between that reviewer and anything in your world, however indirect. Because if there is, I need it in writing on my desk before Brandon finds it first. He took out his phone, right there at the table, no hesitation. He typed something and sent it and put the phone face down. Done, he said. They sat for a moment in the noise of the coffee place, other people's conversations, the machine behind the counter, the ordinary sounds of a morning that was not their morning. The text, she said, the anonymous one. Brandon or someone in his network. They're trying to tell me something about you that makes me lose confidence in the project, or lose confidence in you. I know. Is it working? He looked at her steadily. Is it? She thought about the night in the lobby of the Hargrove building, crouching on the floor over the substrate damage. She thought about, okay, you've convinced me, said the way someone says it when they actually mean it and are not managing her. She thought about the apology on the phone, which had come without conditions or justifications. She thought about the things he hadn't told her, and the particular quality of why he hadn't told them. Not manipulation, not strategy in the aggressive sense. Just the reflex of a man who had learned that sharing a problem was the same as losing control of it. Not enough to make me walk away, she said. But I need it to stop. The withholding. All of it. If this is going to work, professionally, I need to be operating with complete information. She held his gaze. Can you do that? Yes, he said. And then, Elena, what Brandon sent, the text. I know. He's going to escalate. I know that too. When he does, it's going to be fast and public. He's been building to something and he doesn't have much more to build with, which means whatever he's planning, it's soon. She had reached the same conclusion at approximately 3 a.m., lying on her ceiling. Then we need to be ready before he moves, she said. What does that look like? It looks like everything I've been building for the past 3 weeks, plus the Cheswick records, plus the variance documentation you're going to get me today, plus independent verification of every structural decision on the Hargrove site. She paused. And it looks like me having a conversation with my own attorney about what tortious interference looks like when it's been documented from the beginning. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before on him, something that wasn't managed or controlled or even particularly composed. It was something simpler than that, and for that reason more difficult to look at directly. You're not walking away, he said. No, she said. I'm not. He nodded once. Something shifted in his shoulders. Not relaxing, exactly, but settling, like a load that had been held at tension, reaching a distribution point. She picked up her bag and stood. Get me the permit reviewer's name by noon, she said.
And Damien, she stopped. Thank you for being straight with me this morning. It should have been a lot earlier, he said. Yes, she agreed. It should have. She left. The storm arrived 3 days later. It came from the north, and the Weather Service upgraded it twice in 18 hours. And by the time it hit the river district on a Thursday morning, it was driving rain and 40-mile-an-hour gusts and the kind of cold that had actual weight to it. Elena was on site by 6 a.m. because a storm of this magnitude required someone with authority present, and she was not going to be anywhere else. By 8 a.m., the site was secure. She had made the call the previous evening to suspend overhead work and brace the exposed framework on the upper floors, and she had been right to do it, watching the crane locked and stabilized against a sky that was moving fast and dark. The crew was sheltered. The building was holding. She was in the trailer reviewing the morning's situation report when Marcus knocked and opened the door at the same time, which he only did when something required immediate attention. There are government vehicles at the gate, he said. City Construction Authority. They have a court order. Her stomach dropped. She kept her face level. How many? 3 vehicles. I count 6 people. There's... Elena, there's a man with them. Not city. He's in a private suit. The gate guard says he came in a separate car. She already knew who it was. She put on her sight jacket and went out into the rain. The wind hit her immediately, sharp and cold, pulling at her hair. She walked to the gate with her chin up and her hands free, not running. She would not run, moving at the pace of someone who is expecting this and is not afraid of it. The city officials were in rain gear. Their credentials were real. She checked them, standing in the rain, taking her time with each one, making them wait. Not because she was stalling, but because she was going to be absolutely certain about who she was dealing with before she said a single word. A senior inspector named Varga. 2 assistant inspectors. A process server who handed her a folded document that was a court-authorized temporary work suspension order, citing material specification irregularities and safety concerns on the east curtain wall. The east curtain wall. The same connection detail from the first anonymous complaint. She read the order twice, rain spotting the paper. Then she looked up. Brandon Vale was standing 20 feet behind the city officials, under an umbrella, in a coat that was wrong for a construction site, clean and expensive, the coat of a man who intended to watch something happen, not to be part of it. His face when he saw her read it was the face she remembered from the trailer. Not triumphant, tight, like a man who has been waiting a long time for something and is not as satisfied by its arrival as he expected to be. She folded the order and put it in her jacket pocket. Mr. Varga, she said to the senior inspector, I want to cooperate fully with your office, and I will. But I need 15 minutes to make one phone call before I allow access to the site. I have that right under the terms of the order. Varga looked at her. He was a professional. He nodded. She walked back to the trailer. She did not look at Brandon. She shut the trailer door and stood in the relative quiet of the rain against the roof and called Damien. He answered in one ring. I know. I just got a call from my site manager. My attorney is already... Listen to me, she said. Don't send anyone here. Don't make calls to the city authority. Don't do anything that looks like interference with this process. Elena, I have the documentation. I have everything. I have been building this for 3 weeks, and it is clean and it is complete, and I need to handle this myself. If you send attorneys here, if you make calls, it looks like pressure. It confirms the story. She stopped, caught her breath. Trust me. Can you do that? A pause. The rain hit the trailer roof like something insistent. Yes, he said. She hung up. She picked up her site binder. The complete documentation file, 3 weeks of meticulous record-keeping, independent structural test results, material certifications, inspection records, everything dated and signed and cross-referenced. She had kept it in the trailer in a waterproof case because she had known, in the part of herself that planned for worst cases because worst cases had happened to her before, that she was going to need to carry it into exactly this kind of conversation. She went back out into the rain. She stood in front of Varga and she opened the binder and she began. She walked him through every material specification flagged in the suspension order. She produced the independent test results, not the city's inspections, not her contractor's internal records, but third-party structural assessments she had commissioned herself from a firm with no connection to Moretti Development Group, all conducted in the last 3 weeks, all finding the same thing, full compliance, no deviations, no safety concerns. She produced the digital chain of custody on every material delivery, from manufacturer to site to installation. She produced sign-off sheets from every phase of the curtain wall construction, including sign-offs from the city's own inspectors at each of the 3 previous visits, which she had preserved in physical and digital form. She did this in the rain, standing at a folding table she had the crew set up outside the trailer, because she was not going to let the weather be a reason to do this inside where the dynamics were different. She wanted Brandon to stand in the rain and watch her work. Varga was a thorough man. He went through the documentation carefully, his assistant making notes. He asked questions, precise, technical questions that told her he knew what he was looking at, which she respected even under these circumstances. She answered everything. When she didn't have a specific document immediately accessible, she knew exactly which tab it was in, and she found it in under 30 seconds every time. The whole process took 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, Varga closed the binder. She had offered to let him keep a copy, and he had accepted. And he looked at her with an expression that was professionally neutral, but contained at its edges something that was almost respect. "The documentation you've provided is comprehensive," he said. "I'm going to need to review it against the complaint before I can formally rescind the suspension order, but I'm not seeing the material basis for the safety concerns cited." He paused. "I'll have a determination for you by end of day." "Thank you," she said. Varga and his team went back to their vehicles. The process server had already left. Elena stood at the folding table in the rain with her sight binder in her arms and turned to look at Brandon Vale. He was still there. He hadn't left. She had not expected him to leave. He was looking at her with something on his face she had never seen there before. Not in 5 years of a relationship, not at the gala, not in the trailer. It took her a moment to identify it because she had never associated it with Brandon's face. It was uncertainty. She walked toward him, stopped 6 feet away. The wind pushed between them. Neither of them moved. "It's over," she said. Not loudly, not with heat, just clearly. "Whatever you thought you were building, it's over. The documentation I just gave Varga goes into the city's permanent record. Every complaint, every inspection, every submission. It's going to be very clear to anyone who looks at this project in the future that the interference was not coming from the project." Brandon's jaw worked. "You don't know what you think you know about Moretti. I know exactly what I need to know." She took 1 step closer. "And I know what you did. The 3 complaints. The forged investigation. Yes, I know about that too, Brandon. I've known for 10 days. My attorney does as well. The question I've been sitting with is whether what you've done rises to the level of tortious interference and potentially criminal fraud. And the answer my attorney gave me is yes, depending on whether you're done." He stared at her. "Are you done?" she asked. Something happened on his face. It moved through several things in quick succession: defiance, calculation, and then something that was just tired. He was a tired man. She could see it now that she was looking directly at him, without the armor of her own anger in the way. He was a tired, frightened man who had decided that her success was the proof of his failure, and who had spent months trying to undo that proof. And it had not worked, and he was standing in the rain on a construction site at the end of it. "You ruined my—" he started. "I didn't ruin anything," she said. "You lost the VP position because your firm's analysis was outcompeted. You lost the Cheswick bid because someone priced it better. Those things happened without me. I had nothing to do with any of it." She paused. "You just needed someone to blame." His face contracted. "Don't do that. Don't stand there and—" "Brandon." Her voice cut through the rain, quiet and precise. "If you file another complaint, I will file. If you contact my partner again, I will file. If you come within 100 yards of this site, I will file, and I will have you arrested." She held his gaze. "Walk away, right now, while you still can." He stood there for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked to his car without looking back. She watched him go. She stood in the rain until his car was through the gate and out of sight. Then she felt her legs go slightly liquid with the specific physical aftermath of sustained adrenaline, and she put one hand on the folding table to steady herself, and she breathed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Damien. "Is it done?" She typed back. "Suspension order will be rescinded by end of day." Brandon left the site. 3 seconds. Then, "Are you all right?" She looked at the phone for a moment. The rain was letting up slightly. the storm beginning to move east. The building stood above her in the gray light, patient and structural and real. She typed, "I'm standing. That's enough for right now." She went back inside the trailer and sat down at her desk and put her head in her hands for exactly 60 seconds. She allowed that 60 seconds. Then she lifted her head and opened the Hargrove structural drawings and went back to work, because the storm had passed but the building still needed to be finished, and she was the person who was going to finish it. Varga called at 4:58 p.m. The suspension order was rescinded. The site was cleared to resume work the following morning. She called Gerald. She called Marcus. She sent a brief professional email to the full project team informing them that the temporary suspension had been lifted and construction would resume at 7 a.m. Then she sat alone in the trailer in the gray quiet of the late afternoon and let herself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of what the day had been. Not pride, not triumph. Something more complicated than either of those. The particular exhaustion of someone who has spent everything they had on something that mattered and discovered, at the end, that they had been right to spend it. Her phone rang. Damien. She picked up. "I'm outside the site," he said. Can I come in?" She looked at the empty trailer. The rain had stopped. Through the window, the building was catching the last of the afternoon light, brick and steel and the beginning of something. "Yes," she said. He came in with 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner and no umbrella, which meant he'd been standing outside in the rain at some point and had not thought to get one, which was somehow the most human thing she had learned about him. He set a cup in front of her and sat down across the desk, not in the client chair but in the second work chair, the one that put him at the same level as her rather than on the other side of something. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. "You did that completely alone," he said. "I know. I sat in my office for 2 hours not making phone calls." He said it flatly, like a confession. "That's not something I've done very often." "I noticed." "How?" "You didn't send anyone," she said. "You didn't call the city authority." "I could tell you hadn't when Varga's team arrived without anyone from your legal team behind them." She paused. "Thank you for that." "It was the right call," he said. "You knew it before I did." She drank her coffee. It was good. He had remembered how she took it, which she filed away without meaning to. "Brandon's not going to stop," she said. "I told him to walk away. He might, for now. But this isn't finished." "No," Damien agreed. "He has the Cheswick documents, the Patricia Hale connection. Even if it's not legally actionable, he's going to take it to someone who will put it in print." Damien's voice was even. "I know. I've been thinking about it since this morning." "And?" He looked at her steadily. "There's a way to get ahead of it. A full voluntary disclosure. My attorney makes a statement. I make the 1987 records public along with a complete legal analysis of why they represent historical context rather than current liability. I take the Cheswick connection and I put it in a press release with Patricia Hale's recusal documentation and a timeline that shows every decision was made correctly and by the book." He paused. "I give Brandon nothing to break because there's nothing left to break." She looked at him. "That exposes you." "To transparency? Yes. To scrutiny. To people looking at your family name and your father's records, and I know what it exposes me to," he said. "I've been carrying my father's name for 41 years. I know exactly what it costs in a room." He met her eyes. "But you stood in the rain today with 3 weeks of documentation and you made it clean by having nothing to hide. I think I know how to do the same thing." The trailer was very quiet. The building was going darker outside the window as the light finally went. "Do it," she said. He nodded. He took out his phone and made the call right there, from the chair across her desk, while she finished her coffee and watched the last of the light leave the building's face. She listened to him speak to his attorney, not performing composure now, not managing the call, just talking, direct and clear, saying exactly what he intended to do and why. And when the attorney pushed back on 2 points, he listened and adjusted and pushed back himself on a third and won it. And she watched all of that happen and felt something settle in her chest that had been held taut for a very long time. He hung up. "Thursday," he said. "The statement goes out Thursday morning." She nodded. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at the end of difficult days, keeping moving, making noise, insisting on its own continuance regardless of what had happened inside the lives of the people passing through it. "Damien," she said. He looked at her.
When this is over, she stopped, reconsidered. When the building is finished, I need there to be a clear line between the project and whatever this, she gestured between them, is becoming. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. That's fair. I'm not saying... She paused again, feeling for the honest version of what she was trying to say. I'm not saying nothing. I'm saying I need to finish this building as your architect, not as someone with a personal interest in protecting you. You're already both, he said. The directness of it landed somewhere between her ribs. She didn't look away. I know, she said. That's the problem I'm trying to manage. He looked at her with that expression she had never seen on anyone else, the one that felt like being read accurately, which was both better and worse than being read the way most people read her. You're doing it the right way, he said, for what it's worth. I don't say that to a lot of people. She stood up. She started gathering her files, the work of the day, the evidence binder that had stood between the project and its destruction and had held. She picked up her coat. Thursday, she said. I want to see the statement before it goes out. You'll have it Wednesday night. She nodded and moved toward the door, and she had her hand on the frame when he said her name. Not Elena, just her name, the way he said it when he wasn't performing anything. She turned. Brandon isn't just going to stop because the statement goes out, Damien said. When a man like that has nothing left to attack with legitimately, he paused. He makes decisions he can't take back. She looked at him. The weight of what he was not quite saying was specific and clear. You think he's going to do something? I think he's going to do the thing that desperate people do when they have run out of legitimate options and they cannot accept that. He held her gaze. I want you to be careful. She stood in the doorway of the site trailer with the cold air coming in behind her and looked at the man sitting at her work desk in the dark, and she felt the full complexity of the next chapter of what this was. Not fear, not doubt, but the particular alertness of someone who has been in the fight long enough to know that the most dangerous moment is always the one right before the end. I'm always careful, she said. I know, he said. Be more careful than that. The statement went out Thursday morning at 7 a.m. Elena read it at her kitchen table with coffee going cold beside her, the way she had read most of the important documents in her life, alone, in the early hours, with the city not yet fully awake outside the window. Damien's attorney had sent it to her Wednesday night as promised, and she had gone through it twice with a red pen and sent back 4 suggested revisions, all of which Damien had accepted without argument, and the version that went out Thursday morning was cleaner and more precise than the draft she'd received, and it said everything it needed to say. It disclosed the 1987 records in full. It disclosed Patricia Hale's recusal and the family connection with documentation. It disclosed the Riverside variants and the timeline with documentation. It laid out, in careful and legally precise language, the complete history of every connection between Moretti Development Group and any city official or regulatory body over the past 10 years, with a legal analysis attached that had been prepared by a firm with no previous relationship to Moretti. The analysis concluded, in 4 pages of dense professional prose, that no improper influence had occurred in any of the identified instances. It also named Brandon Vale, not as a criminal, not in language that would generate a defamation claim, but by name in a factual recitation of events, the 3 anonymous complaints filed with the City Construction Authority, the dates, the content, the pattern, the forged material specification investigation, identified as forged through independent forensic document analysis that Damien's legal team had apparently been conducting for weeks, results that Damien had not mentioned to her until the statement arrived Wednesday night, and about which she had a brief and pointed text exchange with him at 10 p.m., before deciding that she was going to save that conversation for a time when she was not also trying to review a legal disclosure document, the unauthorized access to construction site drawings, the pattern of interference documented from its beginning. It did not accuse Brandon of criminal conduct. It described what had happened and let the shape of it speak. By 9 a.m., she had 3 calls from journalists. By 10, Gerald had called twice. By 11, Renata had sent a text that said simply, "Clean. Well done. Both of you." She did not call Damien that morning. She was on site at 6:30 because the building didn't stop needing attention because the world outside it was paying attention to something else. And she had learned a long time ago that the work was the thing that held when everything else got complicated.
She walked the site with Marcus and reviewed the progress on the upper floor framing and had a 40-minute conversation with the mechanical contractor about the HVAC rough-in schedule and signed off on 3 material deliveries and did not check her phone for 2 hours. It was Marcus who told her at noon that something was happening at the City Construction Authority offices downtown. He showed her the news alert on his phone. A press conference. Brandon Vale, identified as a private citizen and former acquisitions director at Langford Capital, he'd been terminated, she registered that detail without particular emotion, had called a press conference at 11 a.m. to respond to the Moretti disclosure. He had brought documents. He was claiming that the disclosure was a cover-up rather than a transparency measure, and that the real story of corruption in the Hargrove project ran deeper than anything Moretti's attorneys had admitted. She read the alert twice. Then she handed the phone back to Marcus. "Get me Renata," she said. Renata picked up before the first ring finished. "I'm watching it," she said. "He's making specific claims about the Hargrove project, Elena, not just the historical records. He's saying the current structural specifications were altered to meet a predetermined budget target and that the alterations compromise the building's safety." The cold moved through her chest and settled. He's claiming what? That materials were substituted. That the specifications on file with the city don't match what's actually in the building. Renata's voice was careful and fast, the way it got when she was processing something legal in real time. "He has a document. He's calling it an internal memo from your firm. He's saying it shows Gerald Foss authorizing a material substitution that Elena Whitmore concealed in the site documentation." She was very still. The construction site moved around her. Workers, machinery, the ordinary noise of a building being built, and she stood in the middle of it with her phone pressed to her ear and felt something that was not panic and was not calm, but was somewhere between them, the specific state of someone who has been hit and is running the damage assessment before they decide how to respond. "It's fabricated," she said. "I know that. You know that. But it's fabricated and I can prove it." She was already moving back toward the trailer, her pace controlled. Every material delivery on this site has a chain of custody document. Every specification change goes through a formal amendment process with city notification. There is no substitution. There was never a substitution. Whatever document he's showing people doesn't exist in our firm's records because we never produced it. "Elena," Renata's voice had shifted. "He's calling for an immediate halt to construction and a full independent investigation. He's already filed a formal complaint with the State Architectural Licensing Board about you personally." She reached the trailer and went inside and closed the door. The noise of the site went slightly muffled. "The licensing board," she said. "Formal complaint. Your license is not automatically suspended. They have to investigate first, and it takes time. But this is going to require a response from you, in writing, to the board." Renata paused. "And Elena, there's something else. He named a specific location in the building where he claims the substituted materials were used. Northeast corner, 3rd floor. He has photographs." "Of what?" "I don't know yet. The press conference just ended. Someone's going to send me footage." She sat down at her desk. The structural drawings were open where she'd left them. The northeast corner, 3rd floor. She knew that section of the building better than she knew her own apartment. She had been over it 4 times herself, and had the independent test results for every connection point in that section sitting in a binder 6 inches to her left. "Send me whatever you can get," she said. "I need to see what he's showing people." She hung up and called Damien. He picked up immediately. "I've seen it." "The photographs," she said. "What is he showing people?" "My team is pulling footage now, 30 minutes. His voice was controlled, but she could hear something underneath it. Not anger, something tighter than anger. "Elena, whatever he has, it's manufactured. I know it's manufactured. I need to know what the manufacture looks like so I can dismantle it." She pressed her palm flat on the desk. "Get me those photographs, and get me your complete site access log for the last 60 days. Everyone who has been on this site, contractors, inspectors, delivery personnel, everyone." "Why the access log?" "Because he has photographs of something in that building. And if the photographs are fabricated from a real location on the site, someone had to be in that location to take them." She stopped. "And if they're not fabricated from a real location, if someone physically altered something in that building to make it match his story, then someone with site access did it." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds. I'll have it to you in 20 minutes, he said. She hung up and pulled the northeast corner documentation from the binder and spread it on her desk, and went through it line by line, looking at dates, looking at sign-offs, looking at the sequence of events for that specific section of the building from the day the framing went up to the most recent inspection. Marcus knocked and came in. He set a laptop on the desk beside her drawings without a word and turned it so she could see. The press conference footage. Brandon at a podium outside the City Construction Authority building, in a coat she recognized from the construction site that night in the trailer, looking like a man who had decided that going down publicly was preferable to going down quietly. She watched it with her jaw set and her hands still. He was composed. She gave him that. He had prepared this, had whatever coaching people got before they stood in front of cameras and made accusations, and he delivered it with the measured concern of someone who was troubled by what he'd discovered and felt a civic obligation to share it. He held up the document, a printed memo on what appeared to be her firm's letterhead, dated 6 weeks ago, bearing Gerald's name and her own, describing a cost-saving material substitution on the third-floor northeast curtain wall section. She looked at the document for a long time. She looked at the letterhead. She looked at the formatting. She looked at the date. Then she picked up her phone and called Gerald. I was already on with his attorney. She could hear the tension in his voice when he switched over to her. Not fear. Gerald Foss did not do fear, but a tight, pressurized quality she had never heard from him before. I'm looking at it, he said. Elena, I have never produced that document. I have never authorized a material substitution on any active project without a formal amendment. That memo does not exist in our files. I know, she said. The letterhead is ours. The formatting is close, but there are 2 things wrong with it. The address block is our old format, before we updated it in September, and the signature line has my full middle name, which I don't use professionally. His voice tightened further. Whoever made this had access to an old document from our firm. Before September. She went very still. Before September. Before the contract. Before the gala, even. Brandon had been preparing this for longer than she had understood. He had obtained something from their firm's records. An old document, something with letterhead, something that gave him a template, before any of this became the active campaign it had become. Which meant this was not improvised. This had been built with patience and with access to something that was not public. She thought about Brandon at the gala. The way he had mentioned the Hargrove bid. I heard you put in a bid. The things get around. She had assumed at the time it was the normal leakage of industry gossip. Now she was thinking about it differently. Gerald, she said, did Brandon have any contact with our firm before the gala? Any professional contact, a bid process, a referral, anything where he might have been in contact with our office staff? A pause. I'd have to check. Check now, please. She heard him putting someone on it. She set the phone down partially and went back to the access log Damien had sent through, which had arrived in her email while she was watching the footage. She opened it and started going through it, looking at the northeast corner section, looking at who had been logged into that section of the building in the past 60 days. The list was long. Construction sites had a lot of people moving through them, but she was looking for something specific. Someone who had been there without a clear work reason. Someone whose presence in that section didn't align with their listed role. She found it on the 41st entry. A building inspector. City credentials. Logged onto the site 18 days ago for what was recorded as a routine follow-up visit. Cleared through the gate under a credential number. Assigned to the northeast section for 2 hours. None of the 3 previous complaint-generated inspections had sent a follow-up visit. She knew every inspector who had been on her site. She did not recognize the credential number. She opened a second browser window and ran the credential number against the City Construction Authority's Public Inspector Registry. The number did not return a current employee. She sat with that for a moment. The number returned a record. A former employee who had retired from the City Authority 14 months ago. Someone who should not have been able to use that credential to access an active construction site. Someone who had used it anyway. She called Damien back. I need you to pull the security footage, she said. Gate camera and the third-floor interior camera if you have one. 18 days ago. On an individual logged in as a city inspector using credential number. She read it off the screen. He was on the northeast section for 2 hours. A pause. Then, you found something. I think someone was in that building staging whatever it is Brandon put in front of those cameras this morning. She kept her voice even. I need the footage. Pulling it now. Elena. He stopped. What? If someone was in that building, if there's physical alteration in the northeast section, we need to stop work immediately and document the existing state before anyone disturbs it. He was right. She hated that she hadn't gotten there first, but he was right. Do it, she said, right now. Flag the entire northeast section. Nothing touches it until I've been through it personally. She went to the northeast section herself within 20 minutes, with her documentation binder and her inspection torch, and Marcus behind her keeping everyone else back. She went through that section of the building the way she went through every section, methodically, starting from the structural elements and working outward, looking at every connection point and every material surface with the specific attention of someone who built these things and knew what they were supposed to look like. It took her 40 minutes to find it. In one of the wall cavities, accessible through a panel that had been improperly reseated, she caught the edge of it by the light angle, a millimeter gap that shouldn't have been there. Someone had installed a section of lower-grade material, not structural, not load-bearing, a non-critical interior wall section that would not affect the building's safety in any meaningful way. But it was there, a section that did not match the specification, and it was new. She could tell by the installation pattern, by the way it sat against the surrounding work, that it had been placed after the surrounding construction was complete. She photographed it from every angle. She documented the panel gap. She documented the surrounding work. She called Marcus in and had him witness and countersign her documentation log. Then she stood in the half-built interior of the third floor and understood what she was looking at. Brandon had sent someone into this building, someone with a fraudulent credential, someone who knew enough about construction to do this convincingly, to create physical evidence to support a claim he had already decided to make. He had planted the substitution. He had photographed it. He had built the paper evidence around a real physical thing that he himself had put there. He had committed fraud. Not the technical, arguable kind, the kind with photographs and access logs in a staged crime scene that had been documented by the person it was staged against before anyone else had touched it. She called Renata. I need you to contact the State Attorney General's office, she said. Construction fraud. Evidence tampering. I have documentation of a staged material substitution. I have the access log. I have the fraudulent inspector credential, and I am standing in front of the physical evidence right now. Her voice was completely level. I need to do this right. Walk me through what I need to preserve. Renata was quiet for half a second. Then she shifted into the mode Elena had seen from her before in genuine crises. Calm, fast, precise. Don't touch anything else. Photograph everything with timestamps. Get a licensed structural inspector on site today. Independent, not connected to Moretti, to witness and document the existing condition. Don't let city authority on the site until you have your own record established. She paused. And Elena, this is going to be very public. I know. Are you ready for that? She looked at the wall cavity, at the planted material sitting wrong in the surrounding work, as obvious to her eye as a lie told by someone who didn't know they were being watched. She thought about the evidentiary file she had been building for 3 weeks. She thought about the rain and the suspension order and Varga's careful, neutral professionalism. She thought about standing in the rain with her binder while Brandon watched from under his umbrella. Yes, she said, I've been ready for a while. The next 4 hours were the most precisely executed of her professional life. She worked the phone and the site simultaneously, holding both with the specific kind of focus that only came when you were completely certain you were right and had the evidence to prove it. The independent structural inspector arrived at 2 p.m., a woman named Dr. Carolyn Park, whom Elena had used on a previous project and trusted completely, and spent 90 minutes documenting the northeast section with the thoroughness of someone who understood that this documentation was going to end up in a legal proceeding. Renata was on the phone with the AG's office. Gerald had confirmed that Brandon Vale had been in contact with their firm's office manager 9 months ago, posing as a prospective client requesting a capabilities packet, which would have included firm letterhead and sample documents. 9 months. Brandon had been building this for 9 months. The realization should have felt like a blow. Instead, it felt like the last piece of a structure clicking into its correct position. Everything was load-bearing when you understood where the load was going.
At 4:30, Renata called to tell her that the AG's office had opened a formal investigation. At 4:52, the state licensing board called to inform her that the complaint against her license had been received and that standard procedure required a response within 30 days, but that given the information her attorney had shared with them, they were expediting their preliminary review. At 5:15, her phone showed a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. Something made her. Brandon's voice was not what she expected. It was quiet. Not the press conference voice, the composed, civic-minded concern, but something underneath that, without the performance. Just a voice. Tired in the way she had seen on his face in the rain. "I know you filed," he said. "Yes. You found it." He didn't mean the filing. "I found it," she said. A pause. The sound of somewhere quiet on his end. Not his office, not a public place. Somewhere he had gone to make this call alone. "Elena." He stopped. Started again. "I need you to know." He stopped again. "Don't," she said. Not unkindly, but clearly. "Don't tell me what you need me to know. We're past that." He was quiet. "You planted evidence in my building," she said. "You forged a document with my name and Gerald's name on it. You filed a fraudulent complaint with the licensing board." She kept her voice level. "There is nothing you can say to me about what you need. The conversation we're able to have right now is about what comes next for you legally, and that conversation should happen between you and an attorney, not between you and me." Another pause. He exhaled. "I needed you to have failed. I needed that to be true." She stood in the late afternoon quiet of the site trailer and felt the words land. Not with anger, with something more exhausting than anger. The specific sadness of understanding someone completely and finding nothing there that justified the damage they'd caused. "I know," she said. I know that's not an explanation." "No," she said. "It's not." She heard him breathe. She heard the particular quality of someone who has run out of road and knows it and is standing at the edge of it. "Get an attorney," she said. "A good one. And Brandon," she stopped. She thought about not saying the next thing. Then she said it anyway. "I don't have any satisfaction from this. I want you to know that. Watching you fall apart doesn't give me anything I needed." He didn't respond to that. After a moment, he ended the call without saying goodbye, and she sat with the phone in her hand for a few seconds, and then set it face down on the desk. She didn't call anyone for 20 minutes. She sat at her desk and looked at the Hargrove drawings and listened to the construction site go quiet as the workday ended. And she let herself feel the complete shape of what the last 4 months had been. Not triumph, not relief, exactly. Something more complex than either. The particular weight of someone who has been in a sustained fight and has not been destroyed by it and is only now beginning to understand what it cost. She called Damien at 6. He answered on the first ring. "AG's office called me," he said. "The investigation is open." "I know." "Dr. Park's report is going to be filed with the licensing board tonight. Renata's already submitted the access log and the fraudulent credential to the investigation." He paused. "It's done, Elena." "Yes," she said. A silence, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence between people who have been through something together and don't need to fill it immediately. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one. Not the ones I gave you in the middle of everything when they were also strategy." She didn't say anything. She waited. "I withheld information from you 3 separate times," he said. "Each time I told myself I was handling it. Each time I was actually protecting my own control of the situation and calling it something more considerate than that." His voice was even, but had a quality of effort to it. The effort of someone saying something they've thought carefully about and are saying directly rather than around. "You deserved better than that from the start. I'm sorry." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "That's a minimal response to an apology." "I know." She looked at the drawings. "I'm still deciding what I think about all of it, the withholding. What I know is that when it mattered most, when I told you to stand down today, when I told you to trust me with the inspection, you did. That counts for something. It should have been the whole pattern, not the exception." "Yes," she agreed. "It should have." Another pause. She could hear him somewhere.
His office, she thought, by the particular quality of the silence around him. Alone at the end of a long day, which was probably how he spent most evenings, and which she had only recently begun to understand was not a preference but a habit built from years of operating in a world where trust was a liability. "The building's going to be extraordinary," he said. She almost smiled. "Yes, it is." "When is the opening?" 6 months. If we stay on schedule, which we will." She paused. "I'm not done with the East Wing interior specification. The terrazzo integration is going to take another month of coordination." "I know. I've been watching the drawings evolve." She looked at the drawings on her desk. The northeast section, the east wing, the lobby with its layered terrazzo, all of it present on paper, all of it becoming real in steel and stone and light, a mile from where she was sitting. "It's going to be the best work I've done," she said. "Not pride, just fact." "I know," he said, and then, "I want to see it finished." "You'll see it finished," she said. "You own it." "That's not what I meant." She was quiet. She knew what he meant. She had known for a while what he meant and had been deciding what to do about it, and she was not ready to have that conversation on the phone at the end of this particular day when she was still processing 3 other things that needed processing. 6 months, she said. "Ask me again at the opening." A pause. "Okay. Good night, Damien." "Good night?" She hung up and sat at her desk for a while longer. Then she packed her bag and turned off the trailer lights and walked through the construction site in the early evening. The site gone quiet, the building dark against the last of the sky. Scaffolding and steel, and the bones of something that was becoming what she had designed it to become. She stopped in the middle of the site and looked up at the building. It was not finished. There was still 6 months of work between what existed right now and what she'd drawn on paper. 6 months of decisions and problems, and the ordinary grinding difficulty of making something real that had only existed in her mind. But the bones were right. She had known it from the first site visit, standing in the gutted lobby with Damien pointing out the ironwork. The bones of this building were right, and she had understood what it needed, and she had given it that, and no one had been able to take that away. She walked home that evening because she needed the air and the movement and the 45 minutes of city around her without a screen or a phone demanding anything. The case was building. The investigation was open. Her license was going to be fine. The building was going to be fine. Brandon Vale would face what he'd built, with an attorney who would try to construct the most favorable interpretation of events possible, and that interpretation would sit against the evidentiary record she had compiled with 3 weeks of methodical work and would not fare particularly well. And that was not justice in any large dramatic sense. It was just accountability, which was smaller and more impersonal, and ultimately more durable than justice. She thought, walking, about what Damien had said in the conference room the morning he told her about the 1987 records. "I told myself the records weren't a real threat. I was wrong about that. The particular quality of that admission, not performed, not strategic, just accurate. She had dealt with enough men in her professional life who could not say I was wrong, who constructed elaborate alternatives to those 3 words, that she knew what they cost when someone said them without dressing. She was not ready to say she knew who he was. She was ready to say she knew who he was in the ways that mattered to her, which was a smaller but more honest claim. 6 months. The licensing board's preliminary review came back 3 weeks later, finding no basis for formal disciplinary proceedings. The complaint was dismissed. The board's letter was 2 paragraphs and entirely professional, and she read it twice and put it in the evidentiary file. Brandon Vale was charged by the state AG's office 6 weeks after that. 2 counts of construction fraud, 1 count of evidence tampering, 1 count of filing a false report with a regulatory body. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case would take time, these things always did, but Renata told her the evidentiary record was, in her exact words, airtight. Langford Capital issued a statement confirming his termination and noting that the circumstances were unrelated to his performance, which was a very careful way of saying it without saying it. She didn't follow the case. She had given the evidentiary file to Renata and the AG's office, and she was done with it. What happened next was their work. Her work was the building. She finished the terrazzo integration in month 4. It took longer than she'd planned because she found an unexpected issue in the subsurface that required a design modification, and the modification required 2 weeks of coordination with the contractor and a formal amendment and a notification to the city, and she did every step of it correctly and thoroughly and documented every decision, and the final result was better than the original specification because the problem had forced her to solve something she hadn't known needed solving. She called Damien to walk the lobby the evening they finished the terrazzo. She called him because she had been the one who insisted on the integration approach over pure restoration, and he had been the one who had not liked it and been convinced, and she wanted him to see it finished. He arrived in the same dark suit, no tie. He stood in the lobby and looked at the floor, the terrazzo. The new sections integrated with the original in a way that was designed to be visible rather than concealed, because she had argued from the beginning that architectural honesty required acknowledging repair rather than pretending the damage hadn't happened. And he was quiet for a long moment. "You were right," he said. "I know." He looked at her. "You always say 'I know' when people confirm you were right. Did you know that?" "I'm aware that I was right," she said. "I didn't need confirmation. I said I know to confirm that you've caught up." He almost laughed. She heard the edge of it, the almost sound that she had come to recognize as the closest he usually got to it. "That's extremely arrogant," he said. "Only if I'm wrong." "I wasn't wrong." He looked back at the floor. "No," he said. "You weren't." They walked the building that evening, the full building, all 8 floors, the way they had walked it on the first site visit 5 months ago. It was a different building now. Not finished, there was still a month of work left, but shaped, present. The building had become what the drawing said it would be, which was always, she found, both satisfying and slightly strange. Things existed in your mind in a certain way, and then they existed in the world in a certain way, and the two things were related but not identical, and reconciling them was something she never quite got used to. They ended up on the roof, which had a terrace that was part of the hotel's amenity offering, designed to give guests a view of the river. The river was there, gray and wide in the late evening light. The city was there, the way it always was, enormous and indifferent and going about its business. They stood at the railing, not the terrace railing at the Meridian Grand, a different railing on a building she had built, looking at a different angle of the same city. 5 months ago, she said, I was going to walk away from this project 3 separate times. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you didn't. So am I. She paused. Though I want to be clear that it had nothing to do with you. It was the building. He turned to look at her. Was it? She held his gaze. The wind came off the river and moved through her hair, and she let it. Mostly, she said. He nodded slowly. Something settled in his face. The managed quality going quiet, the composure going somewhere simpler and less constructed. She had seen it before. She liked it better than the other version. I want to ask you something, he said. I know. The opening is in a month. Yes. I asked you 6 months ago to answer me at the opening. He paused. I'm asking a month early. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at the river. She thought about the terrazzo floor 8 stories below them, the new work visible in the old, the repair made legible rather than hidden. She thought about a conference room on the 6th floor of a different building, and okay, you've convinced me. She thought about 2 hours in the rain. She thought about, I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and can you trust me, and the long, specific work of finding out whether the answer was yes. I'm not finished with this building, she said. I have a month left. I know. And when it's done, I'm still going to be your architect of record for the warranty period, which means a professional relationship for at least another year. I know that too. I need those things to be separate, she said, the project and whatever else this is. They cannot be the same thing. When you're calling me because there's a contractor question that needs to feel different from... She stopped. It needs to be separate. It can be separate, he said. I know how to keep things separate. That has historically also been your problem, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Yes, you're right. You're going to need to work on that. I know. She looked at him, at the careful, controlled face that had been, over the course of 5 months, becoming less careful and less controlled in specific and identifiable ways, in the way he admitted things, in the way he sat in her trailer in the ordinary chair rather than across a formal desk, in the almost laugh she had learned to hear. She had designed enough things to know that structure revealed itself slowly, that what something was made of only became clear under load. She had seen what he was made of under considerable load. She had not finished deciding what to do with that information, but she knew more than she had known at the Meridian Grand in November, and what she knew was enough to take the next step, which was the only thing being asked of her right now. "The opening," she said. "Stay through the end of it. Don't disappear into the business conversation by 9 o'clock." He looked at her steadily. "Okay. And if someone asks whether we're together, don't answer on my behalf." "What do I say?" "You say ask her." She paused. "And I'll say something honest." The corner of his mouth moved. The almost laugh, but different this time. Not suppressed amusement. Something warmer than that. Something that looked like it had been waiting a while. "Okay," he said. They stood at the railing for a while longer. The city went about itself below them. The river moved. The building held the two of them on its roof without effort, the way good structures hold whatever is placed on them. The load distributed correctly, the bones right. The grand opening of the Hargrove Hotel was on a Saturday in April, 6 months and 4 days after the day Elena had submitted the bid that won her the project. She wore something different this time. Not the navy dress she'd worn to the Meridian Gala, the one she'd chosen because it asked nothing of anyone. She wore something her friend Renata had convinced her to buy, dark red, designed by someone whose clothes were made to be noticed, and she wore it the way she wore everything, without apology, without performance, just as a fact. She arrived before anyone else. She stood in the lobby alone for 15 minutes before the doors opened to guests, just her and the completed building, the terrazzo floor. Catching the light the way she'd calculated it would. The ironwork restored and present overhead, the windows expanded and filled with the particular quality of late afternoon light that she had designed them to receive. It was the building she had drawn on paper. It was better than she had drawn, because the problems she had solved along the way had made her draw it better. She stood there and let it be what it was. The guests came. The ballroom filled. There were people she knew professionally, people from the city's development world, journalists, city officials, the contractor's team, her own team from the firm, Marcus and Diane and the others who had built this alongside her. Gerald was there. Renata was there, in something green, already talking to someone with the focused energy of a person who is constitutionally incapable of leaving a professional event without making 3 useful connections. She moved through the room the way she had moved through the Meridian Grand 6 months ago, with intention, without hurry, greeting people she needed to greet and allowing herself to be in the room without performing being in the room. Except that this time she was not trying to disappear. This time the room was partly hers. She had helped make it what it was, and she did not need to be invisible inside it. Damien arrived at 7:30, which was slightly late in the way of a man who did not particularly feel the social pressure to be punctual. She was in a conversation near the east wall when she saw him come in. Dark suit, no tie, the particular composure that she had spent 5 months learning to read. He found her in the room immediately, which she noticed. He made his way through the crowd without urgency. He stopped to speak to 2 people she didn't know. Brief, professional. The conversation of someone who was attending someone else's event and was not interested in making it his own. Then he continued in her direction. He stopped beside her when she finished her conversation. He stood at her shoulder, not in front of her, not between her and the room, but beside her, the position of someone who was present and not performing presence. "The terrazzo," he said, looking down at the floor. "I told you," she said. "You were right." "I was right about everything," she said. "Eventually." He looked at her then. Not the managed look. The other one. The one that had been developing over 5 months, and that she had been watching develop and deciding what to do about. "You were right about most things," he said. "There were 2 weeks in there where I thought you were going to be wrong about the window integration." "I was never wrong about the window integration." "I know. I said I thought you were going to be wrong. You weren't." She looked back at the room. The building she'd made, full of people doing the ordinary human things people did when they were gathered in a beautiful space, talking, drinking, the particular quality of people who were not conscious of being held by something well-designed, but who were calmer and more present because of it. That was what good buildings did. That was what she had spent 15 years trying to do. She felt good. Not triumphant. That word was too loud for what she felt. Just good. The specific goodness of someone who had done difficult work correctly and was standing in the evidence of it. A woman she didn't know stopped to introduce herself and compliment the building's lobby, describing it with the vocabulary of someone who didn't know architecture but knew what affected her. Elena listened and responded and meant it. She was not thinking about Brandon Vale. She had not thought about Brandon Vale in 3 weeks, and that was not forgetting and it was not forgiving. It was something simpler. He was a chapter that had been closed by the weight of its own evidence, and the next chapter was open, and she was in it. When the woman moved on, Damien said quietly, "Someone asked me earlier if we were together." She turned to look at him. "What did you say?" "I said ask her." She held his gaze. The building held them both. The room continued around them, all its noise and light and ordinary human life. "Good answer," she said. He waited. She looked at him, at the controlled face with the things she had learned to see behind it. The man who had withheld and been wrong about it, and said so without conditions, who had sat in the ordinary chair, who had stood down in the rain when she'd asked, who had said I was wrong and meant it with the specific difficulty of someone for whom those words cost something real. Not perfect. She had no interest in perfect. She had spent 34 years understanding that perfect structures were brittle ones, that what held was what had been tested and had bent without breaking, what had been repaired honestly rather than concealed. "Ask me something," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Will you have dinner with me? Not at an event, not connected to the project. Somewhere quiet, where we're not—" He gestured at the room. "This." "Yes," she said. Not a performance, not a resolution of something, just a yes, small, direct, the kind of answer that was only possible after all the harder answers had been given. He nodded once. The almost laugh again, but further along this time, closer to the real thing. "Tuesday," he said. "Tuesday," she agreed. She turned back to the room. She put her champagne glass to her lips and drank and felt the building around her, solid, complete, holding everything placed inside it with the quiet reliability of something built right, built honestly, built to last. She was not the woman who had walked into the Meridian Grand in a navy dress trying to disappear. She had known that for a while. She was the woman who had walked into a storm with 3 weeks of documentation and held the line, who had stood in the rain and not moved, who had built something in full view of everyone who had bet against her and had built it correctly. She was not done. There was more work. There was always more work, more buildings, more problems that would require her to be smarter and more precise and more willing to be wrong and correct herself than anyone expected. There were more rooms she hadn't designed yet and more structures she hadn't solved. There was a year of warranty conversations ahead with a man she was going to have dinner with on Tuesday, and she was going to keep those things separate and clear, and she was going to do it well because she knew how to do difficult things well. And she was standing in a building she had made, in a room full of people who were calmer and more present because of how she had designed the light. And the man standing beside her had said, "Ask her," and meant it. And she was 34 years old with her whole working life ahead of her. And the person she was standing next to was not someone who needed her to be smaller. The city was outside, going about itself. The river was there. The building was there. And Elena Whitmore, who had survived and been told that surviving was barely enough, and had proved, without raising her voice, that surviving had never been the ceiling, was there too, right where she was supposed to be.